Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2030 season is about to get underway for our Oakland A's. We are shockingly the defending World Series champions after winning 94 games a year ago and then taking out the team with the largest payroll in baseball, the Los Angeles Dodgers, 4-2 in the World Series, while our A's, of course, had the lowest payroll in baseball. So can't ask for anything better than what we did a year ago. We've simmed through all of spring training since our last episode, and the 26-man roster has a number of surprises on it. It was a relatively quiet off-season for the Oakland A's. Did not have a lot of financial flexibility after our budget was cut by $2 million this past off-season, despite that World Series championship. We did suffer one very significant injury in spring training. Unfortunately, lost our starting catcher, Drake Baldwin, to a ruptured tendon in his finger. He's going to be out until about the All-Star break. Coming off of an off year for him, but he has generally been a respectable-ish hitter for us with a very good glove, and it's definitely a loss to not have him on the 26-man roster as this season gets underway. Before we take a look at the 26-man roster, we'll let you know the final cuts that we made. For pitchers, Brandon Eisert, who you may remember we picked up in the Rule 5 draft from Cleveland last December, left-handed pitcher that we ended up sending back. And Colby Allard, a left-handed reliever who's been with us a couple of different stints over the years here in Oakland, signed him to a minor league contract, and he ended up being the odd man out as far as the pitching staff as we were cutting down to 13 pitchers. Turning to our position players, a couple of surprises, I think, in terms of players who did not make the team. First baseman Diane Jorge, who we picked up in a trade this past offseason, did have one option year left, and with the trade that we made for Willy Adames, Jorge ended up missing out on the 26-man roster. And then the final cut is going to be surprising to those of you who have been following us throughout the offseason, particularly with the fact that catcher Drake Baldwin is on the injured list. But Tyler Stevenson, who is a guy that we had kind of targeted all offseason and ended up signing to a minor league contract, ended up getting demoted to AAA as well. So it's going to be a bit different as far as the 26-man roster compared to how I thought this might have looked 5 or 6 weeks ago, game time-wise. But before we take a look at the 26-man roster, a few things to report on as far as our final last 4 or 5 weeks of work in the development lab, and no improvement for 5 different programs. We got a poor result on base running from Luis Lara. His injury proneness with his legs has deteriorated from bordering on fragile to fragile. So given that he has been a guy who's had rough injury proneness anyways, his legs, which are a decent part of his game after 21 steals last year and 19 the year before, are even more susceptible to injury now. So certainly the decline in the base running ability and the decline in the health of the legs of our center fielder is not positive. Positive news is that we did get a couple of outstanding results. Gabriel Gonzalez, who we traded for this past offseason, had an outstanding result. His base running rating improves by 5. And perhaps most exciting, Jake Ortega, who was our first round pick in the draft last year, a college player who's going to be starting this season in Double A and conceivably could be in the mix to be a September call-up for us this year. Had an outstanding result, improving his defense in the center field. His outfield arm rating, his outfield range rating, and his outfield error rating all improved by 5. So taking a look at Ortega, when we picked him, we felt he was a guy who could play center field in the pinch if we needed. But now with that 70 outfield range, 60 error, and 60 arm, we'd feel pretty confident playing him in center field. So particularly with the fact that it's conceivable that Luis Lara will continue to have some injury issues. Ortega, rather than being a corner outfielder, hopefully of our future, may actually be the center fielder of our future. As we noted, we're starting him in Double A Texas this year. Hit 294 in a very small sample size in Class A, and then 272 and 173 at-bats in high A ball last year, putting up a 139 WRC plus. So he looks ready to do a good job in the Texas League this year, and our hope is certainly that we'll be promoting him to AAA within a few months. And as I said, if all goes well, maybe we'll see him in the majors in September. He's considered the number 14 prospect in baseball, so pretty excited to get that good result in the development lab with Mr. Ortega. So on to our 26-man roster as we try to defend our World Series title, and perhaps even more importantly than that, put together another good season on the field. It would only be our second good season on the field if we're able to have a winning record and hopefully make the playoffs. And hopefully over time get this fan loyalty with the A's, which is a significant limiting factor in our attendance and our fan interest and ultimately our financials straightened out. It's probably going to take several more years of good results on the field, so we'll take it one step at a time and hope that we can at least have back-to-back winning seasons when this year is over, and in a perfect world, back-to-back playoff seasons. Jackson Ferris back for us as our ace this year. He was 12-6 a year ago, his first year in Oakland. 2.7 is his ARB number this year, expected to be about $6 million next year. So maybe tough to keep him for the medium term, but hoping for a good result from him this year. Mason Miller, 14-8, 3.17 ERA, back as our number 2 starter. Bubba Chandler, your 2029 American League Cy Young Award winner, after he went 13-6 with a 3.02 ERA, back as our number 3 starter. Mason Black, who was our stopper a year ago, 14-8 with 17 saves and a 3.68 ERA, moves into the rotation. You may remember from this past offseason that we made qualifying offers to a pair of veteran pitchers, Kyle Bradish and Nick Lodolo, both of which were declined, and we ended up with a supplemental first for Bradish and a supplemental second for Lodolo. That opened up 2 spots in our rotation, and Black will take one of them. And then Mitch Keller, who was primarily a reliever for us a year ago after we traded for him midway through the year, will get the first crack at being our number 5 starter this season. Turning to the bullpen, Chase Lee will be back at our closer. He's been our closer for the last 2.5 years or so. 27 saves with a sub-2 ERA a year ago. Only pitched 45 2/3 innings because we were so reliant on Mason Black as a stopper. Don't have anyone that we feel strongly about being a stopper this year, which probably means we'll be looking for more innings out of Chase Lee. Joe Rock, who we picked up as a minor league free agent this offseason, is going to hopefully do well for us in a setup role. He is a guy that would certainly be in the mix to be a starter for us if Black or Keller falter towards the back of the rotation. Ben Leeper has been a setup guy for us for the last few years. He's back in a similar role this year. And then similar to Rock, we added the lefty Cody Funderburk this offseason, picked him up in a trade right after the end of last year with the Giants, and hoping that he can be a useful left-handed setup man for us. Duncan Marston, rookie on the team, was the 4th overall pick in 2024, our first draft with the A's. Made his major league debut last September and pitched well over an admittedly small sample size of 8 2/3 innings. He's going to get an opportunity to start off as a middle reliever. He would be another guy who conceivably could be in the mix to layer into the rotation down the line. Emmett Sheehan back in a middle relief role. He does have the stamina to potentially be a starter, as well as a 3-pitch arsenal, but think at this point he's probably best served in the bullpen. Hunter Brown, a guy we signed as a minor league free agent back on March 3rd out of, he pitched last year for both Cleveland and Detroit, and between those two organizations tied for the league lead with 15 losses. It's a reunion with him, had him on the team back in 2028, and that stint with us in 2028 with a 3.62 ERA was by far his most effective stint of the last few years. So hopefully he will be a solid long reliever for us, another guy who could conceivably help out in the rotation down the line. And then Jose Hernandez, lefty specialist for us. He is the Rule 5 pick who stuck. Picked him up out of Cleveland. As I mentioned, we also sent Brandon Isert, another left-hander, back to Cleveland. But with the additions of Hernandez, Funderburk, and Rock this offseason, we do have 3 left-handed arms in the bullpen, in addition to, of course, lefty Jackson Ferris at the top of this Oakland A's rotation. Turning to our 13 position players that are headed north with Oakland, Augustin Ramirez, who's had a really nice first year for us as a backup catcher, playing primarily against lefties, is going to get the opportunity to be our everyday starter at catcher here in 2030. His backup will be MJ Melendez, who's actually going to be our DH against right-handed pitching when he's not filling in as a backup catcher. Melendez is a guy we picked up as a minor league free agent this year. He was with us in 2028, split time between AAA and the majors, was not particularly good in the majors. Do like that captain personality and hope that he can at least give us a little bit of offense when he's playing, particularly against right-handed pitching, where, as I noted, he's going to be our DH. So I don't necessarily love the fact that our backup catcher is going to be in the lineup as a DH 70% of the time-ish. If that ends up being an issue, as I noted, we do still have Tyler Stevenson down in AAA. But a big part of the reason Stevenson did not make the team was that J.D. Davis, minor league free agent signing in March as well, is going to be making the team, is going to be playing regularly against left-handed pitching. Felt like his bat at this point is a little better against lefties than Stevenson's, but given that it's a minor league contract, and at this point he's going to be making the major league minimum for us, a relatively low-risk proposition, but it's certainly conceivable that we'll be seeing Mr. Stevenson sooner rather than later. Tyler Soderstrom, your 2029 AL batting champion, 2029 Silver Slugger at first base, 2029 All-Star, and 2029 Major League Baseball champion, is going to be back as our starting first baseman against right-handed pitching. Made the trade for Willy Adames this past offseason. He's going to play third for us against left-handed pitching. Hideki Arakawa is going to get the opportunity to be our second baseman against right-handed pitching. Cameron Cawley is going to be our second baseman against left-handed pitching, coming off of an injury. And the reason those guys are going to be platooning at second is that when we look at the defensive ratings, Brian Rincon is probably our best defensive shortstop at this point. So he's fragile physically. I don't know if we're going to be able to keep him healthy, but he is going to be our everyday shortstop, at least for the time being. And we haven't mentioned Colt Keith, but Colt Keith, who had a monster year for us last year, probably would have been in the mix to be the MVP if he didn't miss almost 30 games with 2 stints on the IL. Will be back as our starting third baseman and cleanup hitter against righties, and he'll still be in the cleanup spot, but playing first base against left-handed pitching. Turning to our outfield, Chase DeLauder will be our starting left fielder this year. DeLauder, of course, was both the ALCS and the World Series MVP a year ago. Put up a 118 WRC plus for us in the regular season in his first year in Oakland, and of course was much better than that in the postseason, where he had a ridiculous 188 WRC plus, 4 homers and 15 ribbies in 16 games, en route to those 2 playoff series MVP awards. Luis Lara, who's already banged up with an elbow contusion, will be our starting center fielder. And then in right field, we are going to have a platoon. Lawrence Butler will once again be our right fielder against right-handed pitching. And Gabriel Gonzalez, the new addition that we talked about, picked him up in a trade with San Francisco in the offseason, is going to be starting for us against left-handed pitching. Certainly his ratings that suggest we can mix and match to get him into the lineup against right-handed pitching as well, but think that playing him as often as possible against lefties will be positive. And if we have to play him against righties from time to time, which is certainly conceivable given Lara's fragility, I think he can hold his own against right-handed pitching, although I don't think he's necessarily going to excel against right-handers. So that is the 26-man roster for our Oakland A's. At this point, before we move on to our next episode and when we'll be getting the season underway, last thing for us to do is to check in on how the experts think we're going to play this year. You may remember that last season we were projected to win 76 games, which I thought was underestimating us. I certainly felt like we were going to be a winning team last year and felt like we had an outside chance at the playoffs. Obviously, it came together even better than that, but was not impressed when they thought that we were going to win 76 games last year, and we certainly outperformed that significantly. On paper, I think we are a bit weaker this year, if I have to be completely honest. As I mentioned, Black was a stopper for us last year because our rotation was so deep. Moving on from Lodolo and Bradish definitely leaves some holes in the rotation, and we've also got unproven lefties in our bullpen. And then everyday position-wise, we've got guys like MJ Melendez and JD Davis, who were minor league free agent signings, who ended up making our 26-man roster, which is probably a sign that it's not incredibly strong. I'm going to be reliant on Gabriel Gonzalez, and then other than that, it's all holdovers with Ramirez, Soderstrom, Arakawa, Keith, Cawley, Rincon, DeLauder, Lara, and Butler. Adames, of course, is a new addition as well. So I'd say that the position players are largely the same as a year ago. Certainly hurts that we're going to be missing our starting catcher for the first half of the season, but I feel like the pitching staff is where we've had more turnover this offseason and potentially have a few more questions. We were huge beneficiaries last year of the fact that Soderstrom and Keith both had career seasons. And quite honestly, Brian Rincon, who probably had the third best offensive season for us last year, kind of had a career season as well with 16 homers, 78 ribbies, 22 steals, and a 5 WAR. So you would have to think that there would be some reversion towards the mean for all three of those players. They still should, or hopefully still will all be well above average players, and in the cases of Soderstrom and Keith in particular, should be well above average offensive players. But if those guys are all a little bit worse during the regular season, it's conceivable that we'll have some regression in our offense as well. So, do I think this team is a 94-win division champion again this year? Probably not. We're not going to have a ton of money to bring on help, and we're going to be having to look for help that's in the final year of their contract, so that's a bit of a limiting factor. In the draft budget, we've just got barely enough in there. Actually, since the season is starting, I'm going to up it just a bit to $10 million. Again, that only gives us an extra few $100,000 to play with. So it's not going to necessarily allow us to make a huge room, but hopefully gives us a slightly higher amount of flexibility when we get to the draft in a few months. We were able to retain scouting and player development at pretty healthy levels, albeit lower than they were a year ago. But we're not going to have a ton of money to take on contracts. And given that, although I don't think we're going to be favorites to repeat in the AL West, we certainly would love to. But I don't think it's going to be a easy road for us to repeat. Does look like potentially we could be generating somewhat more revenue, almost 10% more revenue per game this year than a year ago, if nothing changes between now and the end of the season. Certainly would expect that things will go better or things will go worse, so that's probably not the way things will ultimately play out. But if we could get a 10% increase in our ticket revenue this year, that would certainly help in the financial profile of this franchise going forward. But without further ado, let's see what the predictions are for us. And we're projected to be a fourth place team, which is not very good, 80-82. So that would certainly be a disappointing record for defending World Series champion. Interestingly, the AL West is projected to be the closest division by far in all of baseball, with just 5 games between the Astros and Mariners on top of the division and the Angels in last. So it seems like we may have to get a bit lucky to win another AL West title. According to this simulation, we're even going to have to get lucky just to have a second consecutive year above 500. But as I mentioned, the projections were that we were going to win 76 games a year ago, and we did much better than that. I have a tough time seeing this team getting into the 90s in wins, but I certainly believe that we should have a winning record this year, and I think we should still be competing for a playoff spot. Whether or not we'll end up in the playoffs is certainly uncertain. That was a weird way to phrase that. But I think we can be competitive. And if this Oakland A's team is competitive with the smallest budget and the smallest payroll in baseball, I can't complain about that. Colt Keith projected to have another monster year for us, 281, 35 homers, 111 ribbies. Nobody on the team projected to have a great pitching season. You can see Texas with Max Fried, Logan Gilbert, and Ty Madden has three pitchers expected to have monster years, and Josh Hader, Reese Olson, and Ranger Suarez expected to have huge years for the Tigers. So the pitching for both the Tigers and the Rangers expected to be really good, although those teams at 81 and 81 and 83 and 79 aren't necessarily expected to be significantly better than we are. Our 4.41 team ERA that we're projected for is kind of a middle of the pack type figure after we've been one of the better pitching staffs in the American League for the past several years. Runs scored with 748. Looks like that's pretty much a middle of the pack kind of projection as well. And 80 and 82 is kind of a middle of the pack type record. So it all kind of lines up, although I do expect and hope that when all is said and done, we will be better than projected, and hope that this team and expect that this team will have a winning record this year. And if all goes well, we'll end up in the playoffs with a chance to try to defend our title. And we'll find out how the early stages of our title defense proceed in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.